Sweet. So I believe I had the first part. And so the introduction and that section basically just talks about, how we use metaphors in everyday life, what a metaphor is, just kind of, reinforcing that, comparing two things without using like or as, and then talking about it in education. Um, and really going through that and just giving some kind of examples of like what teachers might refer to themselves as. A couple of the examples were like an air traffic controller, or a nurturer, or a sheepdog. And that's basically what that section was about. And my question that I got from, all of that information, and specifically the parts about um, using metaphors for teachers and for education, and how do teachers think of themselves basically with metaphors. And so it's kind of like a three-part question, I guess, but what are some metaphors that you use to describe teaching now that you've been an educator for a couple years? And then have the metaphors that you use changed? If so, how have they changed? Has your view on what education looks like changed since you were fresh out of undergrad, and how so?
I'll start. It's funny, Jessica, that you that you asked that, because I'm looking at the question I wrote down. It's literally the exact same thing. So great. We're both thinking on the same wavelength here. That's great. So I think how my idea has kind of teaching has kind of changed is, I think I kind of first viewed it as like, um, the teacher is there to kind of pass along information, to be like a supportive figure in that process. Um, but I think as I have been teaching more, I've seen it more now as kind of like, being able to take a step back and allow some of that student growth to happen between the students. So more of that kind of, I'm here to help if needed. And obviously, I'm still giving directions and I'm still teaching, but being more comfortable in taking a step back. I think that's, so I don't have a metaphor for any of that, but that's kind of what I've thought about.
Yeah, when I was reading this, I was trying to think of what my metaphor would have been when I started and what it would be now. And I had such a hard time coming up with a metaphor. But then, like, as we get further, into this discussion of the reading, it was really helpful to hear what all of the pre-service teachers came up with. And then I could kind of like connect to some of those.
I'm not sure if I know what my metaphor would have been when I first started teaching, or even before I started teaching. I think now I would definitely say I try to focus on the teacher as facilitator. Especially, I do a lot of small group work, and so I try to give them the tools they need to make those successful. And I come around and help and guide, but um, they really do the bulk of the work with just a little bit of guidance from me. So I would say that's definitely where I am now. That's certainly not where I was 5 years ago when I started, but yeah.
Well, cool. I'll go next because I had the analysis section, which, by the way, I don't think we mentioned the title of this. It's Thompson's Gods, Guides, and Gardeners. So if you're watching this video and you weren't sure which one it is, that's what it is. But I'm sure it'll be labeled. Anyways, okay.
Do you want me to jump in and do the methodology first?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure if we could go in that order. So I did the methodology section, and the first part was just all about who participated in it, and it was 2 courses of an Intro to Music Ed course. There were 99 music education students who participated. I was impressed that it was pretty evenly split by gender, with 45 male and 44 female, and then there were 10 that did not give that information. And then I was a little shocked by that it says, with the exception of one African American female, one Hispanic male, and two Asian females, all participants who provided information regarding ethnicity were Caucasian. So I was shocked that the numbers were so skewed. I figured they would be skewed, but I didn't realize the extent to which. But it did say that the study took place at a small Northeastern university, so that could have something to do with it, just the fact that it was a small school. And yeah. And then, and as far as the data collection, I thought this section was pretty interesting just on what data they collected and how they gathered it. So they asked each student to A, draw a picture of an image of themselves as the teacher, B, label or title the picture, and then C, write a short paragraph describing what the picture intended to show. And then they took each one of those and categorized them by the metaphor that they wrote out. What I found interesting was that there wasn't a prescribed list of metaphors, and I don't know if that would have helped the study. I don't know if that would have given a bias to the study. This might have been more true, but I was curious on your thoughts as to, would you have done it that way? Would you have left it so open-ended, or would you have tried to give them some frame of reference to go off of?
I liked the fact that it was so open-ended. I think I would have done the same thing if I was doing the study. I think that, you know, like as Katie was just saying, she didn't really have a metaphor, but then when she read what other people wrote, then it kind of started giving her ideas. But I think by doing that, it would have skewed, you know, what people thought. You know, we always know, like, once you put that bug in someone's ear, you know, so I think if they would have seen a list, they would have, you know, subconsciously thought like, oh, that's a right answer, or oh, that's a wrong answer, or oh, so many people said this, I gotta say it too. So I like the fact that they left it so open-ended.
Yeah, I agree. And basically for the same reasons that you just said. Because yeah, when I was looking at the list of different metaphors, I found myself like connecting with you know different parts of them, and then that's not really like my own true metaphor, right? It's going off of other people. So yeah, I think it was good that it was open ended because you get more of an honest response.
I agree with all that. Cool. Well, I guess I'll actually go next. Sorry for jumping ahead of you, Seth.
No worries.
So I had the analysis section, and so basically the author took all these responses, right? All of these metaphors that these students gave and all the pictures that they drew, and was able to kind of pare it down to two ideas. So they kind of revolved around the teacher knowledge relationship, how teachers disseminate knowledge, and then also the teacher student relationship. So within the teacher knowledge relationship, they kind of saw three different ideas. So the teacher as the transmitter of knowledge, as the facilitator, and as the collaborator. So transmitter, he talked about, like, you know, the gas station attendant filling their head with gasoline knowledge or whatever. Facilitator, that the teacher is kind of taking them around to new ideas and allowing them to explore, like an airplane captain. The collaborator, where the teacher is kind of is like a bee. It's going from flowers and from flower to flower, kind of transferring pollen, transferring knowledge that way. And then within this other category, this teacher to student relationship, they also kind of saw three different ideas. So relationship as like a mentor, as a motivator, and as a leader. So the mentor is kind of like the teacher is like a gardener, where they are nurturing plants, and they're making sure that the area around the plants, I'm moving my hands, but you guys can't see them. The area around the plants is like safe and good for growth. Teacher as a motivator, is like the cheerleader. the teacher's trying to hook the students and really get them involved and passionate about it. And then the teacher as like the leader, or like a police officer, was one metaphor. So like the teacher is controlling and it is, kind of giving out information that way. So I think that ends my section. And then the question again, as Jessica said, I literally wrote, how, if at all, do you think the students' metaphors would change as they began teaching? And what metaphors did you all resonate with? So I think we've already talked about that. So we can go ahead and move on.
All right. So I had the next section, interpretations and implications. And what they found was that there was no like one overarching metaphor. There was like a variety of images, but from those images, they came up with 3 root metaphors, and those 3 root metaphors were production metaphors, growth metaphors, and travel metaphors. So kind of a little bit of what Erin just talked about, but production metaphors were like the teacher is the transmitter, where the teacher was the expert or the one that was the most skilled with rigid plans. And then the students were kind of like the raw materials or the ingredients that the teacher was working with. This production metaphor kind of privileged the teacher and the subject matter over the student. The growth metaphors showed the teacher like constantly working, and learning is based on challenging the students. And then the focus was kind of privileging the student over the subject matter. And then the travel metaphors showed the teacher as the guide, showed students as diverse individuals, and then suggests a vision of teaching that's collaborative between the teacher and the students. Implications. I'm just going to go ahead and read the quote that I took here from page 53. Metaphor reveals conceptions of teaching that are often difficult to express and often tacit, but are likely to be based on intuition, personal beliefs, and past experiences, is especially useful to the music teacher educator. And then toward the very end there, they listed some examples of like further research that could be based off of this. So some of their ideas were to examine the robustness of the images and the ideas, examine the use of metaphors for discovering and developing deeper and more elaborate images of teachers and teaching, and then to the extent to which institutional interventions can make differences in music education students' thinking. So I guess my question from this section is, do you feel that teachers like understanding what their own personal metaphor would be is helpful to them in their teaching? And yeah, I guess that's my question.
Yeah, actually, I think that kind of reminds me a bit about, and Seth, you were in the seminar last weekend too, but the idea of like having a philosophy and of how you teach, and then how that philosophy manifests itself into your classroom, like really practical ways. I think that's kind of along the same lines, like having your own metaphor for how you feel like you teach, I think is a great start for understanding your relationship in the classroom to the students and how the knowledge is disseminated, I guess. So yeah, I think it's really important.
I agree. I actually really liked this article because it kind of made me think about the practices that I currently do, but it also made me think about the practices that I don't necessarily do. One of my weaknesses would be kind of under the growth metaphor. And I would love to, after reading this, really focus on that throughout the next couple years and see if I can not lose some of the travel metaphors that they talked about, but I would love to add and supplement with a little bit more individual growth for each student.
I agree. I mean, I also think a metaphor, I think that's just an easy way to remind yourself of your philosophy. Most of the time, philosophical statements are, they're longer and sometimes they get a little wordy. And, when we all write them to like put in our resumes, we try to sound super professional and smart and all this kind of stuff. And I think it would be easier to be like, I think of myself as a travel agent, and just reminding yourself of that and keeping that like image in your mind, I think is a lot easier than trying to keep your, paragraph long philosophical statement, at the forefront. I know I'm the worst at remembering that all the time in the classroom. Like I believe in these things. I want to do these things. But I wrote it in a paragraph and I didn't write it like in my voice. I wrote it like in an academic voice. And so I'm not as likely to implement it. And I think these metaphors help, especially with the pictures too, just to even have that like hung up in your office or something, just as a reminder.
Cool. I think that's everything.
I do too.
Go green.
Yay!